thank you and good morning. Hopefully my good friend from Oregon had some very nice things to say about me. We do work very, very well together. You know, one of the things I like most about the T&I committee is that to get things done, you've got to be bipartisan. And, you know, compromise is not necessarily a bad word in the T&I committee. We work very closely together. We have discussions about what the future of the country is. And I think of no better way, no better committee than to improve our economy than transportation infrastructure. You want to get goods movement going across the country, it's going through T&I. If you're going to get people moving, if you want to get people off of the freeways, it's going to be the Transportation Infrastructure Committee that not only gets people back to work and creates the jobs, but actually doing the projects that can get people to and from work and get goods through our community, imports, exports, but I love the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. It's a great group of people. It's a very bipartisan, and we're actually getting things done. When you look at the accomplishments we've had over the last several years, and specifically the things that have been signed into law, a lot of them have come out of the T&I committee. So let me first start by thanking all of you. You had a big impact on the FAST Act, on actually getting a bipartisan agreement, getting something that makes sense for the entire country, and we couldn't have gotten it done without your help. So I wanted to be here this morning to first of all say thank you. And then talk about the T&I committee overall. I've got a different view than some of my other colleagues. I will tell you that the biggest difference, I think, or at least the way that I tend to look at things, in Congress, you take a bill. FAST Act is one of those bills, the highway bill. You've got 2 years worth of funding, 3 years worth of funding. You're doing a 5 or 6 year bill, and you realize that you've got this gap in funding. And so, like the highway bill or many other bills that come through Congress, you figure out how do you fill that gap. So if you need X billion dollars, you need 2 or 3 years worth of funding, what different things can you come together with to fill that gap? Now my frustration is that we continue to look at a gap in funding and try to find ways to fill a gap rather than looking at a long-term perspective of how do you fix the funding scenario overall. And so I've looked at transportation infrastructure rather than trying to fill a 2 or 3 year gap on a funding bill, instead of looking at the gas tax, which next highway bill, we're going to end up with the same scenario. If we do nothing, we'll be looking at the same scenario again. Maybe we fill this current gap, and then we come to the end of this bill, and we're looking to fill the next gap. The question is, where's that money coming from? The Highway Trust Fund will never, the way that it's currently put together, will never fully fund a highway bill. So then what do we look at? I believe we're going through an energy renaissance right now, and getting rid of the export ban, there's a real opportunity for us to redefine the way that we do business, redefine the way that we're funding all of our infrastructure projects. You know, you look at our public lands, you look at our natural resources. If we're exporting our energy, that gives us an opportunity to have other countries, our allies, actually paying for our infrastructure and creating American jobs in the process. And so I want to have that long-term focus. And the next highway bill, I would hope, would be a highway bill that actually looks at policy issues rather than funding issues. The majority of what we end up talking about oftentimes through Ways and Means and our battles within conference and on the floor is how do you fund these things? Let's come up with a bipartisan agreement on funding so that next time we can actually look at the policy. Because in areas like mine, you know, I talk about the 7th Street Bridge all the time in Modesto. Anytime you've got a bridge that's rated 2 out of 100, decades ago, we stopped allowing school buses to go on this bridge. If infrastructure is so bad that you start excluding different parts of your community going over a bridge because of failing infrastructure, you're waiting for a disaster. We can't wait for a disaster to happen. We've got to address our infrastructure up front. And so I'm looking at different funding ways to resolve a lot of these problems. I've offered some unique solutions in the FAST Act in particular, the PREA bill, the Passenger Rail Reauthorization Bill. We want Amtrak to be sustainable. We want not only make sure that they're sustainable for the future, but we actually want money to go back into the infrastructure. And so we created corridors to allow that infrastructure, that money to be invested back into the corridor so that they can actually improve the routes that they have. I spend a lot of my time, as Donna said, you saw me on the bus. We do town halls on the bus. We do a town hall, I do it regularly with Eric Swalwell, who borders my district, on ACE train. People that don't get a chance to come to our town halls in our community, we hop on the train and we go through the train and talk to everybody on their way to work. And it's really a pleasure to understand what they go through on a daily basis, the commute that they have, what they like, what they don't like. We not only hear concerns about big national policy issues and things that are happening in our community, but we hear, how do you improve public transportation? How do you improve funding? How do you improve efficiencies? And so I think it's a real opportunity for Republicans, Democrats to come together and really understand public transit from that standpoint. In the FAST Act, we also did the PTC extension. We've got to get this right. I mean, we need to have a strong focus on safety, but we not only need to make sure that we get it right, but that it actually gets done and implemented. And so we had a bipartisan agreement on the extension of that. We want quicker project delivery, so we did the NEPA Reciprocity Act from my state of California. Part of the challenge on any infrastructure project is you've got to go through the CEQA process, the California Environmental Quality Act, and then you go through a bunch of hurdles, you go through a bunch of red tape, and then you wait. And then you have some lawsuits, you deal with those, and a little while later you finally get to the NEPA process, the National Environmental Protection Act. Then you go through the same process all again, and then you wait, and this whole thing just not only drives up huge costs in the project, but huge wait times in getting any project delivery. And so you end up with a lot of projects that never even get started or have such big cost overruns that it affects every other project. So we want to have the highest environmental policy possible. Just don't do it twice. Don't have the long delays. Let's streamline the policies that we can so that we're not only being good stewards of the environment, but we're actually delivering projects quickly to get people moving again. Before I open it up to questions, I want to just touch on one thing, and that's high-speed rail. I think that we've got a real opportunity. When I have traveled to other countries, in fact, I was just with DeFazio, I led a Codel to Japan. We wanted to look at some high-speed rail projects together. We looked at Maglev, we looked at their high-speed rail project, we've looked at a few of them across the country on how do you do this right? How do you get it done? While we have improved our logistics and our goods movement across this country, while most other countries would say our freight rail is an amazing way to move product, we have fallen way behind on passenger movement. And so we're looking at how do you get it done? How do you get it done? First of all, how do you get it done? And how do you get it done right? And my frustration with California high-speed rail is it's gone way over budget. The timelines have continued to change. The routes have continued to change. A project that was once popular is facing trouble in the polls right now. And my fear is if we don't get it right, it'll affect every other rail project across the country. Both high-speed rail from a public-private partnership, but any other type of rail expansion. And so my focus is working with them to figure out the challenges they're having and try to come up with some solutions. Now in Texas, will be the second project done. They're doing it majority with private funds. They will do some government loans. The other would be the first one, which will be higher speed. It'll be closer to Acela, maybe a little quicker, maybe a little more efficient. It would be all aboard Florida, and that's going to be open next year. So I think that there are opportunities to do it right, but in California we've had our challenges. And so I've been very critical of the project, but also trying to figure out how do we change it. When I was in the state Senate, supporter of high-speed rail, I actually voted, it was a deciding vote, to move it out of the state Senate. It was a $33 billion project then that was supposed to be implemented in the next several years with a private investor. So before it even went to the ballot, it was supposed to have a private investor. We were going to take it to the ballot box for a $9.95 billion bond, and then we were supposed to come up with, sell that to the federal government to finish the project with $10 billion. This $30 billion project ballooned to $110 billion and has continued to have cost overruns. How do you sell that from a federal perspective? How do I sell that to the other 49 states and say, hey, bail us out? We've not spent the stimulus dollars yet. We continue to move those around. There is no state match currently. There is no private investor. But by the way, we're going to need $80 to $90 billion. So hold every other project across the country and let's focus on California. If California is going to get high-speed rail done, they've got to get it done right. And so we've got our challenges ahead of us. My message to you is I want to see infrastructure built. I want to see high-speed rail built. I want to see public transit continue to grow and get more people off of the roads. But if we fail on a project this big, it will set us back decades. So with that, let me open it up for questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. I do, but California was supposed to be a public-private partnership. There just haven't been any private investors that have been willing to sign up for it. I mean, if you don't know what you're investing in, if you have no plan to show what the ridership numbers are or when you're actually going to receive riders, why would any business ever invest in that? But Texas and all aboard Florida, huge private investment. And so I do think that there is an opportunity to do that. Aside from that, you're going to have huge public buy-in. And so we're facing this with the expansion of ACE Train in our community. ACE Train does a phenomenal job, huge ridership numbers. You know, when we talk to people, they are very excited about riding the train. But expanding that another county or 2 counties over, we have trouble at the ballot box, and we're going to have to address the public funding of that. And so I do think as new projects move forward, the only way that we're going to get them done, at least in the near future, is going to be with public-private partnerships. Is there a question over
Yeah,
here?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
So I'm Rob Healy. I work for APTIB. But my question is this. We've heard from a number of people in the last couple days about the challenges we face on trust fund spending past this bill. You know, certainly the public transportation community and really the highway community that we work with have been, you know, we think that the trust fund mechanism, the trust fund concept is a good one. It provides the predictability and so forth for the kind of big capital projects in transit and highways. And so, you know, we know the gas tax is a hard sell. We know that at the end of this bill, you know, we're going to be back here short on the trust fund being financed. And so do you have any thoughts on what is the best, the most politically acceptable or otherwise way to, you know, to come up with some more sustainable funding mechanism?
Sure. I think that there's going to be a discussion, a conference, a budget. We're going to deal with a whole bunch of different scenarios in trying to come to an agreement on this. Tax reform will be one of the biggest. I mean, we will pass tax reform this year. Probably won't make it out of the Senate, may not get signed by the president or even reach the president. But I think that we have to show a vision for next year on tax reform, and that could include the trust fund. I think as we're going through an energy renaissance, I think we need to look at royalties on natural resources coming off of public lands. I think that's an opportunity as we open up or lifted the export ban. But I would say one of the areas that I tend to look at things a little bit differently is regardless of what we do on that bigger funding picture for that ongoing scenario, whether it's a mix of several different things, we still need an infrastructure bank. And so there are some that are trying to use either mandatory repatriation or even voluntary repatriation to fill a gap. And rather than doing mandatory repatriation, I'd rather see voluntary repatriation used for an infrastructure bank, one that in my area I could build water storage with. If I get the buy-in from the federal government, the buy-in from our governor and the state government, we ought to be able to use an infrastructure bank on a project that users will pay for, but they need the upfront capital to get it started. And then as users pay that back, that continues to grow. We continue to bring repatriation back, and we have a bank that reaches well over $100 billion that we can use for many projects across the country, big bridges, big infrastructure needs. So I think you're going to need the ongoing funding for a stream for the next highway bill, and hopefully, you know, decades out, a funding scenario that continues to work, redefining it in this way. And secondly, you need an infrastructure bank to do big projects. Before we allow a bridge to fail, a huge bridge that we've seen in other states, we need to make sure that we've got an infrastructure bank to improve those projects before they actually fail completely. Yes, sir.
Congressman, my name is Mike Labar, King City Council and Monterey Salinas Transit. Just want to thank you for all your service. You used to be our senator, and then the other valley got your passion and experience. But I do really appreciate all the hard work you've done and with your colleagues for these public transportation funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for giving me a little time this morning. It's always enjoyable to be with you. And let me just say one last time, we don't pass big bills like the highway bill without having your involvement, your support. You touch every single district across the entire country. You have a very loud microphone with everybody that is involved in those transit projects across the country. We're going to need your help in the future, not only figuring out this funding piece, but secondly, doing the work of the next bill as well. So thank you for your previous help. Thank you for coming to Washington, D.C. and being so involved. Appreciate it.